This episode is brought to you by Chevy Silverado. When it's time for you to ditch the blacktop and head off-road, do it in a truck that says no to nothing. The Chevy Silverado Trail Boss. Get the rugged capability of its Z71 suspension and 2-inch factory lift. Plus, impressive torque and towing capacity thanks to an available Duramax 3-liter turbo diesel engine. Where other trucks call it quits, you'll just be getting started. Visit Chevy.com to learn more.
At Sierra, discover great deals on top brand workout gear, like high-quality walking shoes, which might lead to another discovery.
40,000 steps, baby. Who's on top now, Karen?
You've taken the office step challenge a step too far. Don't worry, though. Sierra also has yoga gear. It might be a good place to find your zen. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome to our latest episode of the No Huddle Show, Philadelphia Eagles Goals podcast from NJ.com. This is Cayden and Steele, and joining me every week will be my co-host, Bob Brookover. Today's episode is brought to you by Penco Tech. With 2 convenient campuses in Blackwood, New Jersey, and in Bristol, Pennsylvania, Penco Tech has provided comprehensive hands-on career training for them for more than 50 years, featuring programs in HVAC, electrical, plumbing, automotive technology, and more. With dedicated instructors and career placement assistance, Penco Tech can give you the skills and confidence to build a brighter future. Financial aid is available to those who qualify. Learn more and take the first step by going to pencotech.edu. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to talk about the draft today. We're 2 days away from the draft. We're going to address all the Eagles' needs and all your Eagles' worries. Who could they target? Who are some of the favorites that could go in the first round? Some of the guys they could possibly target in day 2 as well. But before we get into those pressing needs, let's go over the biggest news of the day. Cam Jurgens gets a new contract extension from the Eagles. Quinn, the second highest paid center in the league at $17 million annually, only behind Chiefs center Creed Humphrey. He was locked up through 2029. It's a 4-year deal. Bob, what's your thoughts on the Eagles re-signing Cam Jurgens?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us are surprised by it. I mean, Howie keeps a lot of things secret and close to the vest, but this one was pretty out there in the open. If you just followed the dots in terms of what they did with clearing some salary here with C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Darius Slay, and who knows, it sure seems like we have seen the last of Dallas Goedert, that they're trying to clear that salary. That the purpose of clearing those salaries was to keep young core players and get them signed before they get to their free agent years. And given that, that Cam Jurgens entering the last year of his rookie contract, he would naturally be at the front of the line for that kind of thing. They have the Jordan Davis 5th-year option thing hanging out there, and I still wouldn't be surprised if Jordan Davis at some point, if they can reach the right agreement, if he doesn't end up signing an extension too. But it takes 2 to tango, so I don't know if Jordan Davis's side is saying, hey, let's see if our player who's sure to get more playing time next year with Milton Williams gone, let's see if he can go have a big year. We can get an even bigger deal for him. So I mean that comes into effect there. But yeah, it's not surprising and good for Cam Jurgens. He can go get his TSA pre-check. I don't know if you saw that quote yet. He was asked what he was going to spend his money on, and he said, "I'm going to get TSA pre-check," which he should have plenty left over after that $78 to $85 he has to spend to get that. He's being a little more frugal than his buddy Landon Dickerson last year, who got the $15,000 zero-turn lawnmower after gotten his huge deal. It was pretty funny. He said, "I haven't given it much thought, but I'm thinking about getting that TSA pre-check. That's going to keep me from standing in line." So good for him. He's not going to have to wait at airports anymore.
Yeah, I can't blame Cam Jurgens for wanting to do that. I think I learned that after the covering the Super Bowl coming back from New Orleans that buying that pre-check probably would not be a bad idea if you don't want to wait somewhere for 2 hours. So
Yeah, I was in Florida over the weekend, and it was a little longer than I thought. I've figured out a way to beat the TSA pre-check going out of Philadelphia because I often take a bus from American Airlines that allows me to check in Atlantic City, then I go to Philadelphia. So I'm able to avoid the long TSA lines, at least going out of Philadelphia, and then I try to travel off times coming home so I don't have to deal with it. But yeah, I probably should have invested in it by now, and it's definitely a good investment.
it definitely is. And Cam Jurgens is going to be able to invest in more, I'm sure, with those $17 million a year. He
You
making
should be able to get the whole family TSA pre-check. I
Yes,
think.
yes, making more than Drew Dahlman, Frank Ragnow. There's some guys on this list that maybe he's not better than now, but the Eagles do a really good job of getting guys early on these types of deals, and he's the second highest paid center. And I think in their minds, and from what we saw last year, we can all assume that Cam Jurgens is only going to get better from here. Still really young. It was only his first year at the position. Graded out pretty well from PFF, 16th best center overall last year. Made a Pro Bowl, and I think they're sky's the limits from here on out for him as a player. That's what the Eagles are going to have to do this year in the draft. Bob, you mentioned it. They're signing these younger players to contract extensions. They're letting some of their older guys go, willing to release Darius Slay, trade CJ Garner-Johnson, not really dish out any money other than Zach Bond to the guys they had last year who were free agents. Everyone else is gone. Josh Sweat, Milton Williams. Uh, Howie Roseman's got to build this team through the draft, and recently he's been really good. Last year, Cooper DeJean in the second round, and Quentin Mitchell obviously in the first round. Jalen Hunt the year before gets Nolan Smith, and Jalen Carter as well in the first round. So his last, five of those picks right there, those guys have made huge impacts, and he's done overall, a pretty good job. He's going to have to do that again this year as well. They had the 32nd pick, so it's not going to be as easy at the back end of the first round to land a guy. I guess for you, Bob, 2 days out from the draft, what are some of the biggest needs that you think the Eagles are going to have to address from rounds 1 through 5?
Yeah, I don't know that they have any great needs because if you look at I'm not saying they don't, they're a stocked roster and that they're set to go, but they, if you look at where they've lost players, Darius Slay, Keely Ringo's, the guy they want to step up and, he's entering his third year, so they have a guy they want to step into that position or hoping steps into that position. Same thing at safety, Sidney Brown. They feel like can be that guy, and in addition to those two, they've added guys who if it doesn't work, they feel like they've got a little bit of depth with the 1-year deals they've made. Obviously, you talk about a tackle for the future of Lane Johnson, but now Lane Johnson signed through 2027, so you don't have to do that. Inside linebacker, I think there's some concern there with Nakobe Dean, but not being hurt. Will he be back on time? But not to the extent where you say, oh, we got to go. We have to have this inside linebacker. Jeremiah Trotter's still on the team and had a decent rookie year, especially in special teams. They lose Milton Williams, but it's not like they don't have somebody to be part of that rotation with Moro Jomo. A lot of that depends on what does happen with Jordan Davis going forward. At some point, Jalen Carter is going to get his big deal. You lose Josh Sweat, so you're thin at edge rusher. If I had to say there was one position they need it more than any other, I would probably go with edge rusher because Josh Sweat was such a huge loss, and I know Milton Williams is a big loss too. But I'd probably put the edge over that because Jordan Davis, former first round pick, they don't really have a former first round pick to fill in at edge rusher the way they do. And Jordan Davis is already a pretty big part of that, and so was Moro Jomo for that matter. And now Jalen Hunt finished strong last year, but he's still got some questions. Beyond those are positions that, yeah, they could use some depth there, but there's not one position where you say, oh, they absolutely have to have that position going into this draft, which is a good spot to be because, you always hear general managers say we want to take the best player available, and I think Howie Roseman is in a position to do that, to say, hey, if we think this guy's, if we think this cornerback is better than this edge rusher, we're going to take him.
Yeah. And it's a fair point about the defensive line, and it's a good year to need defensive linemen. It's probably the strongest position groups as a defensive tackle and edge rusher. You figure in the first round or second round, you would be able to land a quality starting edge, or at least a guy that could be your third guy in the rotation. Because although they did a nice job of kind of filling that room with guys with upside like Ezekiel Jalari, who showed a ton of promise with the Giants, and if he's healthy, you might be getting a great player there, but you can't bank on that with his injury history. He might be only available, 10, 11 games next year, hopefully for his career. He can finally, put it together, but it's a tough position to be in if you're the Eagles to really solely rely on him. Josh Uche, who knows what he'll be going forward, had that really good year in 2022. Maybe if Vic Fangio can do what he did with Zach Bond to a lesser extent, because Josh Uche had more success than Zach Bond even had before he came to Philly, but maybe he could get, Josh Uche to break out. But edge rusher is a big need. I agree with you on that, and they're in a perfect position to do it.
The one position I didn't mention was tight end.
Yes,
with Goddard. To me, I know you wrote the thing about Taylor the other day, and I had written about Taylor as well. I don't know if I would take him in the first round. If somehow maybe Colton, I don't think there's any chance Tyler Warren slips that far, but and probably slim chances. There's some Pro Football Focus, the draft simulator, the one I use often, has him slipping late into the first round. And for me, he would be a tempting guy to, if that's a need and he slips to like 28, 29, that at that point, if I'm the Eagles, I might be tempted to move up and get him, whatever the cost is to move up 4 spots in the draft. He's given that position, and not knowing what's happening with Dallas Goedert, but it looks like he's not going to be here. To have a tight end that could be a guy who comes in his first year, catches however many balls for 400 or 500 yards, I think that would be such a valuable thing for this team, and I think they're going to miss Dallas Goedert a lot if they don't have him.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, for bringing it up, because if we didn't touch on my tight end, it would be a mistake. Because if you look at that room, and we're going to assume that Dallas Goedert isn't back next year, which it seems like that's the direction it's heading, it's not a guy, there's no guy in that room that you can really rely on. I mean, Grant Calcaterra is a solid player. I think you can appreciate what he's developed into, but as a starting tight end, it's really tough to project. I don't think he's a good enough blocker. Kylan Granson and Harrison Bryant, those are guys that fill your depth and they can play different roles, but none of them are going to be your lead, pass catcher. You touch on Mason Taylor, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I've seen the talk with Todd McShay saying, that's a name that he would keep an eye out for the Eagles at 32. I've seen other people mention it. Most recently, Daniel Jeremiah said that he's talked to people around the league, and he doesn't think that Mason Taylor is going to get out of the first round. So maybe there is some traction there between the Eagles and Mason Taylor. I know they haven't brought in any tight ends for 30 visits, so maybe they're trying to be secretive about it. But overall, I get it with Mason Taylor. He's a reliable player, and he's a smooth route runner. He's got great sizes. He has everything you want from a solid starter. But I'm not sure if I
got incredible genes.
Yes, that certainly helps as well. But I don't know if he's a super explosive or so dynamic where you want to take a guy like that in the first round. And maybe it's just me being thinking about value, but I don't know if I want to just draft a guy who's going to be solid in the first round. I think he's a good player, but they have a lot of at least depth needs on this team. And you mentioned D-line. I'm not sure if they're going to prioritize tight end there. But if Colson Level were to fall, like you mentioned, Bob, I mean, he would be a great pick. There's some people in this draft who think he has more upside than Tyler Warren, even though Tyler Warren might be a better player right now. Colson Lovely's probably the better athlete, probably the better route runner. Um, but I don't know if he gets past, the Chargers at 22 with Jim Harbaugh and the Colts and the Bears. I mean, so many teams in the top 20, top 25 that need tight ends or at least need a pass catcher. So hard to imagine he gets there, but that would be a great pick. But Bob, you mentioned Colston Loveland as a guy that the Eagles can target. At 32, a lot of different scenarios take place. Maybe that happens, maybe it doesn't. I don't think they go tight end, but what direction do you think the Eagles ultimately go in, and who are the guys you're looking at with that pick?
Yeah, it really it's so hard to predict, and I just created a scenario where they could trade up if somebody like a Loveland slipped down some. I still think the more likely scenario is that they trade out of the first round and try to stack some picks and maybe get another second round pick, a little higher up if they can. If the guy, I mean, the key thing to me that Howie Roseman said last week is we don't have 32 first round grades. Now that doesn't mean what he didn't say was how many they do have. So let's say he has 25 of them. There's still a possibility one of those 25 guys could slip to 32 because obviously teams view players as a very subjective process, and they view players in different ways. So that would lead to a trade up. But to me, the more likely scenario is that they trade down, and if that happens, then it's a real crapshoot about who we're looking at here. I think I forget which day you wrote about James Pierce and Walter Nolan as both edge rushers, and they're guys that very talented guys who seem like they have a chance to be at 32 as edge rushers. And since we talked about edge rushers, Nick Scourton's one of those guys from A&M, although a lot of people think he's going to go before 32. When we're talking about the defensive interior, Tyleik Williams from Ohio State could be there. I think the best interior guys, just because it's become such a valuable position, and the Eagles are living proof of that, could be gone. Before the Eagles make a pick. Before it gets to 32, I think the best guys at that position could be gone. I said Walter Nolan was an edge, but Walter Nolan's defensive interior. A Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon's a guy. Tyleik Williams. Those are guys that could be there. I don't know how much they value them. One guy that I found intriguing in this whole draft, and I think his stock has gone up on the interior throughout the process, is Darius Alexander from Toledo. He's a little bit older, but the fact he's from Toledo, Jason Candle connection with Nick Sirianni, it obviously worked one time. It's really hard to predict who's going to go here, but I just think the Eagles have so many options. I just don't know who's at the top of their list. If you start talking safeties, Nick, I don't know, I'm going to mispronounce his name, the kid from South Carolina, Imamori. He's a guy who slips on some boards, but is around that spot. Tell me what you think.
Trading up, I think it's a fun idea because they have a lot of draft picks, 20 in the next 2 years. But when people talk about this draft class, and I do think it's a reality, there's not a lot of blue chip talent. Outside of your Abdul Carters, your Travis Hunter, Ashton Gianti at the top, there's not a lot of guys that I think are considered those, first team all pro type players, but it is a deep class. So, if you really don't believe you're not going to get, a top 5 player at his position, I'm not sure if it's going to be really worth trading up and giving up future assets for a guy that's going to be a solid player. And I think there's going to be a lot of solid starters in this draft, but how much do you really want to give up in that scenario? So I think the most likely outcome is they do stick at 32 or trade back. If a trade up were to happen, I imagine it would be very small, a couple picks just to secure the guy they wanted. But they're in a good position at 32 because of this D-line depth, like you mentioned, Bob, earlier, and that's a position of need, especially at edge rusher, especially at defensive tackle. And maybe there's a scenario where all these guys go off the board and it leaves the Eagles kind of as the odd man out. But you have to believe that, Walter Nolan or James Pierce or Donovan Ezeraku or Derek Harmon, one of these guys are going to fall. I mean, yes, it's the strongest position in the draft is the D-line, but because of that factor, maybe teams are willing to wait to the second and third round because what's the difference between your late first round defensive lineman and your late second, early third round defensive lineman in this class? Maybe teams don't view it as a significant gap, but they could view corner as a significant gap. There's your first round corner like Will Johnson versus your guy at the end of the second round. Let's say Darian Porter from Iowa State. Teams might view that as a huge difference. So you might want to get Will Johnson early or get another position early on, like offensive line, the tackle class. Maybe you want to get a tackle in the first round. So it's going to cause some of these guys to slide. And ultimately, I believe there will be a player on the board at 32 that they'll like, probably at the defensive line position, if not the defensive line position, probably corner. So I think they're going to get a little bit lucky like last year where Quentin Mitchell fell into their laps. Last year, it was because of such a strong offensive class. It caused Quentin Mitchell to fall. This year, because the D-line class is so deep, I think it will cause a defensive lineman to fall. I know Daniel Jeremiah recently said that he doesn't believe Walter Nolan, or he believes Walter Nolan will be going in the 30s, or not the 30s, the early 20s, or the teens. So he's not projecting him to be there, but other people have been. We talked about Walter Nolan, James Pierce, Bob, and you brought them up, and they're really fascinating prospects because the talent on the field is obvious for both guys. You can make an argument they're top 20 talents in the class. But recently, Jeremy Fowler reported of that teams, that Walter Nolan has a history of storming off the practice field mid-practice out of frustration. So there's been some reports about, character issues. James Pierce, Bob McGinn wrote a piece for GoTDLong.com where he talks about how people at Tennessee wouldn't even bring James Pierce with them to the NFL if they got a job. And that there was times where they were at practice and James Pierce was still in his apartment and they didn't know where he was at. So those would be the ultimate wild cards that could slip because of the off the field characters, those concerns. And but the Eagles, we've seen them take chances on guys like that before that have character concerns per se. And if Big Dom or Dom DeSandro, the head of security, feels comfortable with those guys, that's a direction that I think would be a dream for the Eagles if Walter Nolan is there at 32. So I think ultimately they'll go defensive line, Walter Nolan, Donovan Ezeraku, James Pierce, one of those guys, and they should take advantage of it. It's a really good class, and we saw what they did in the Super Bowl last year. So it's going to be really, really important for them to maintain that.
Let me do a little fun exercise with you here. All right. So I'm doing this based off of a Pro Football Focus, and I'm not always in agreement with how their boards come up. But let's put this board up here that I've come up with here gotten to the 32nd pick. So did the 32nd pick, and still on the board are James Pierce, Trey Amos, who's a cornerback from Ole Miss, Nick Scourton, as we discussed, edge rusher from Texas A&M, Josh Connerly, tackle from Oregon, and Benjamin Morris, cornerback from Notre Dame. Where are you going?
I think I'm going actually Nick Scourton. James Pierce, to me, I would have to know the background and whether the Eagles like the character, and it's tough to project. He might be the most talented of that group, but he's also the hardest one for me to see like, oh, this guy's definitely going to work in the NFL. Because if, what that report is saying from Baum again, if James Pierce doesn't show up to practice, if it's a question of whether he loves football or not, I think there's a lot of things you can work around, but the guy's not committed. It's a tough sell in the first round. Trey Amos, I think, is a really good player. I think he's my consolation prize here. I don't think Eagles fans should be mad if they get Trey Amos. He has really good ball production. He has good size. He would be probably an upgrade over Keely Ringo, even if they do like Keely Ringo. So that would be the second route I would go in. Benjamin Morrison, I think it's the hip injury that concerns me. It was last year at Notre Dame that caused him to miss most of the season. He has a reported hip injury dating back to high school. So for that reason, I would probably eliminate him. But let's talk about Nick Scorton, not the negatives of everyone else. Nick Scorton is a young defensive end. We saw that he took a top 30 visit, and I think he's getting slept on a little bit. He had 10 sacks the previous year at Purdue, and people were projecting him to be a top 10 pick coming into the year. He went to Texas A&M. He gained weight. I think he gained from up to 20 pounds. He was playing around 285, so he wasn't as dynamic, and he was off the edge this year. He just didn't look like the athlete he was at Purdue, but he gained that weight because A&M asked him to. He dropped the weight reportedly. Now he's back into probably going to be in the 260s in the NFL, so he's in good playing shape, and he's young. Ultimately, that's what matters. He's one of the youngest prospects in this draft. He's got good production overall throughout his college career. He's got 33-inch arms, which are extremely long. And you just like, the production profile, the size, where he's played in multiple different schemes. So football IQ, you would imagine, is pretty high. If you believe in NFL Network, if you see the comparison Trey Hendrickson, which they have, I think that should make you excited as well. To me, Nick Scorton seems like the guy of that group that they would take. Would they take him at 32, or would they trade back into the second round to get him, is the question.
Yeah, that is the question, because I think he'd be going pretty quick if you didn't take him at that spot. All right, we'll do one more here. He's off this board on this thing, but would you trade up 2 spots for Gray Zabel?
I would, and this is really dependent on what they feel about Tyler Steen, right? Tyler Steen in limited action, I think has looked fine, but he got beat up by Mekhi Becton last year. And who knows what they think about him this year. They brought in Kenyon Green in that trade with CJ Garner-Johnson. And I don't know if that means they don't believe in Tyler Steen, because you can't really rely on Kenyon Green. And that just might be, let's see what we have in this guy. We brought him in for a top 30 visit a couple of years ago, but obviously they haven't felt enough conviction about Tyler Steen to make him a starter yet. I know year one, he was stuck behind Cam Jurgens, but last year he got beat out. And look, if you don't have confidence in Tyler Steen and you think Gray Zabel's the answer at right guard, and it's a weaker draft class and in terms of blue chip talent, and let's say because of that, all the defensive linemen go off in the top 25, Harmon and Nolan, and they're all gone, and you don't feel confident in James Pierce's background, I don't think it's a bad move because he can play guard and he can also play center. Some people believe he's like Grant Barton from the Bucs, who was drafted in the first round last year, that he has guard center versatility. He would play guard for the Eagles, but Cam Jurgens, who just signed that contract extension, ever gets hurt for an extended period of time. Gray Zabel might be a better option to kick over to center than Landon Dickerson. So I think it would be a good pick in that sense. But if you like Tyler Steen, if you believe in Tyler Steen, I don't think you trade up 2 picks for Gray Zabel, because although he was a college tackle for North Dakota State, I don't think he projects to be a tackle in the NFL, and therefore he wouldn't really have a position. But we really are going to find out, what they believe in Tyler Steen, because maybe they go round 1, maybe they'll go round 2, or maybe they go round 3. They get an offensive lineman to compete with him. And I guess we'll transition to that real quick because that
would find out in that scenario what they think of Kenyon Green. Too.
Yes, and round 2 and 3, that's where I feel like they're most likely to go O-line, Bob. I don't think it will be Zabel in round 1, but I could see them adding a guard, whether that's Marcus Mbo from Purdue, who they brought in for a 30 visit, whether that's Tate Ratledge or someone like that. Day two of the draft is going to be vital for them, just as equally as important as day 1. We saw what they did last year, getting Cooper DeJean. We saw what they did a couple years ago, getting Tyler Steen and Sidney Brown, who they hope will become stars this year. Because of this youth movement that they're undergoing, they're going to have to hit on these picks. What do you think they're most likely to do on day 2?
Oh, day two. It's so tough to say because day 2 is a day where guys who you value more than other teams. I think on day 2 they're going to have more picks than we think they are right now because that's going to go back to trading down. But I think in day 2 is where we do start to see, you know, maybe they take a tackle. Maybe this could be the scenario where they take a tight end. You know, Mason Taylor probably going to go somewhere in the second round, and probably earlier than the 64th pick, which the Eagles had. But if they do trade down, now they could be in a position to take a Mason Taylor. But there are the other good tight end and let's remember this: the Eagles are notorious for taking notorious, not the right word because that means, but or have successfully taken tight ends in the second round in the past. Obviously Dallas Goedert was a second rounder. So was Zach Ertz. The other guy who's on this board projected more as a third rounder, but is Terrence Ferguson from Oregon. So there are guys in this draft, and then you also go with but he seems to be an upper second round guy that could be gone if we're still talking tight ends. Is the kid from Miami, drawing a blank right now. Help me,
Elijah Arroyo.
Yes, yeah, Elijah Arroyo. So I mean, it's possible that's where they go get their tight end. But you can see this team going after some of those positions we talked about. Jared Ivey from Mississippi is an edge guy. I could see Omar Norman Lott from Tennessee as a defensive interior guy. I could see this team going after some of those positions. We talked about the positions we think are needs, and that's where in this second round you're going to definitely see them going after those positions, even the best players at those positions, because that's where they need to get some depth in some of those places. Because if you look at it, we could talk about all the reasons the Eagles won last year, and to me, the depth they had on this team was high on that list, and a lot of that depth was created by the fact that they hit on their first two guys, but then you add in the fact that Jelks Hump was able to contribute late in the season, but by drafting well, those were the only three guys who really, the top three picks for the Eagles were the only guys that really had a significant impact playing all the time. But even Jeremiah Trotter Jr. looked like, when he was playing, he was valuable, and Will Shipley as a special teamer was a valuable player, became a very good, good coverage guy. I'm getting away from the subject here, but I think in the second and third rounds, we're going to see the positions we talked about, guys like that being the best available guys at tight end and on the interior and on the edge are going to be the guys who they go after.
Yeah, we both agree that maybe they won't be aggressive in round 1 with a trade up, but I could see this happening in round 2. Bob, you mentioned Elijah Arroyo. We talked about Mason Taylor earlier. If those are the guys that you believe are tight end 3 and tight end 4, and you see a gap between them and, let's say, Terrence Ferguson and Harold Fannin Jr. and Gunnar Helm, if you believe there's a wide gap and you're stuck at pick 64, that's where we could see them trade up. They didn't trade up. They didn't trade in the first round last year, but they did trade up in the second round to get Cooper DeJean. Maybe there's a pick 64 to pick 52 or 51 this year where they go up and get that tight end and Elijah Aurora and Mason Taylor, and they're kind of stuck in an odd position because of the Dallas Goedert thing, where if you wait to the end of the second round, if you wait to the end of the third round and you don't move up, you're probably not going to get the tight end you want. These guys are going to come off the board. So if they decided that Dallas Goedert won't be back next year and they don't have confidence in Grant Calcaterra and the rest of that group being starters, it kind of forces your hand where you got to get your guy somewhere. And you can't just wait and wait and wait and hope that, one of them will be there.
Right. The one thing about the NFL draft is you see all the time is that, like, okay, there's a group of four players who are comparable at a position. Once one of them goes, they all start going. That's definitely true to that. So, if there's four tight ends in the top 50, you have a top 50 grade, and your team needs a tight end, you're gonna get one of those guys in those first two rounds as soon as and maybe they end up going in the 40s or the 30s. They come off the board maybe before they should have, just because the team doesn't want to get stuck without a position they need. And I'm just using tight end as an example, but as a position they need.
Yes.
This is so I'm still going along here and doing and it's interesting because I've never really looked at the draft, and it'd be fascinating to see a draft board. One of the most fascinating video of last year's draft to me is the Cooper DeJean one of Howie Roseman in there, and obviously wanting him, and it's like, oh man, the Rams are on the board. They were done. We're not going to get him. And what do we got? All right, you watch the phone. Just in a mad, not necessarily panic, but like, God, I want this guy so bad, and it just all fell into place. And how excited he was to get that pick. It was really good theater.
Mm-hmm.
But just like doing like a mock here. All right, I asked you about Benjamin Morrison being a first round pick. So I'm doing this mock through the Pro Football Focus as we go along here. And now Benjamin Morrison, the Eagles are 64, pick 64, and Benjamin Morrison's still a cornerback. And you need that tight end. What do you do? What do you do then? It's just fun to play these scenarios. So Benjamin Morris is on the board. So is Mason Taylor. All right, let's do some other of these other positions in need. What would we say? Edge and interior defensive lineman, right? Or other ones are. Let's do this. Play this little game here. We're playing. So we get to 64, and these are the guys on the board: Benjamin Morrison, CJ West, Mason Taylor, Alfred Collins from Texas, Olafuemo Alawadeheo. Yeah, hopefully I don't have to pronounce him. The edge rusher from UCLA, Josiah Stewart, edge rusher from Michigan, Shamar Turner, interior from A&M, Kyle Kennard, their edge from South Carolina. And then Terrace Ferguson. We'll put him in there too. Where do you go? Do you just the best available according to this board is Benjamin Morrison?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really dependent on what you think of Keely Ringo. And to be fair, we haven't seen much of Keely Ringo. They trusted Isaiah Rodgers more last year, but they were willing to release Darius Slay, and part of that was financial, but maybe it makes you think they have some confidence in Keely Ringo, or they really like this draft class. I'm going to lean with they like Keely Ringo a decent bit. They traded a future third round pick to go to get him in 2023 at the top of the fourth round. I do believe this is the year that they give him a shot to start. At some point in this draft, whether that's the third, maybe the fourth round, I do think they'll address corner and bring in a guy to either compete with Ringo or give them the versatility to kick Cooper DeJean outside when they play nickel. Maybe that's Jacob Harris. So I'll stay out of the corner range for the second round. And two, the Benjamin Morrison hip thing concerns me. The defensive lineman that you mentioned there, I think, although pretty solid players, I don't know if there's a significant drop off between round 2 at those guys in late round 2 versus the guys late in round 3. I think you'll be able to find a quality defensive lineman at pick 96. But I'm not as confident that you will be able to find a quality tight end at 96, at least a guy that's a plug and play starter. And because of the position that you've put yourself in by wanting to trade Dallas Goedert or not willing to give him an extension, and you're going to have to get a starting tight end. And Mason Taylor at that point is good value. I agree with you earlier, Bob. I would not take Mason Taylor in the first round, but in the second round, I would, and he would be a plug and play starting tight end for you next year. You need that guy. Currently on the roster, none of the tight ends you feel great about. Jahan Dotson didn't really prove last year that he could be a high volume number 3. Even though he didn't really get the targets, I'm not sure if they're banking on him being that third key member of the passing game. They've done that the past few years with Goddard. It's been the go to Brown, go to A.J. Brown, go to Devontae Smith, go to Dallas Goedert. Who's going to be the third member of that this year? I think that could be Mason Taylor as the most likely option.
I could see that happening too. Let's talk a little bit about getting to the third round. Now you get to the third round. Are you still looking? Oh, I got to have this, because when I get to the third round, if I'm the Eagles, and this goes back to what I said at the top, all I'm looking at is who do I think is the best player on the board, and I don't care who it is. I don't care what position. I don't care if it's a linebacker. I don't care if it's a safety, a cornerback. Other than probably I wouldn't draft a center or an offensive guard in the third round. But whoever I think the best player is at most positions. But when I say I wouldn't draft an offensive guard, I wouldn't draft an offensive guard who I thought, or an offensive tackle. I thought just because of tackle, it would have to be a guy who could play both, could be show that flexibility. I'll give you my board that's come up. The board that's come up here. So according to Pro Football Focus, Kyle Williams is their 63rd on their big board. All right. And he's still available. Would you take him in the third round? And then Tate Rutledge, who's a guard from Georgia, is 68. Would you take him?
I'd probably take him in the third round. Both of those players I'd probably take based off. I think they're pretty good players. But Bob, you make a good point. Tate Ratledge doesn't have tackle flexibility. So he's not going to be able to be your swing tackle if injuries happen. I think it would be more ideal if they could land a guy like Charles Grant, the offensive tackle from William Mary, in the third round, because he could possibly go inside to guard Anthony Belton, the offensive tackle from NC State, because he's a tackle who projects to be a guard, but he could be your swing tackle. Those guys seem more ideal based off what they need than Tate Ratledge, but Tate Ratledge is a heck of a player, and if you don't like Tyler Steen, yeah, I could see that. Kyle Williams, also a really good player. Jahan Dotson, most likely they're probably going to decline his fifth-year option coming up. So Kyle Williams wouldn't be a bad move, but I don't know if he's the biggest, area of need for this team, especially if they haven't addressed corner, safety, tight end, or maybe another defensive lineman at that point. I don't know if wide receiver's pressing enough.
Right. It seems like the tackle swing guard, when you get to that third round, there could be some really good value there too, I think.
Yes.
With someone, with those guys you just mentioned, get Grant and Belton, I think they could be available and they could be some good value.
Yeah. I think a lot of this draft to me is dependent on how they feel about corner and safety, really. Because I think if they believe in Keely Ringo and Sidney Brown, I think we could see them go, really heavy on the lines early because of the depth at D-line. I could see them double dipping and going, edge rusher first round, DT second round, swing tackle, offensive guard, Anthony Belton-like player in the third round. And then filling out depth on day 3 was backup safety, backup corner, nickel type. I forgot about tight end. Obviously, that's a huge need as well. So maybe they go tight end and then 2 defensive linemen. But this draft to me really is dictated by how they feel about Sidney Brown, Keely Ringo and Tyler Steen, because we really don't know. These guys haven't played much. Ringo, very limited sample size. Sidney Brown, bigger sample size, played as a rookie, had some really good moments, including that pick six against the Cardinals, but then gets hurt with the ACL in week 18 against the Giants that season, and then comes back last year for week 7 against the Giants. He never really gets back into the mix, falls behind to Tristan McCullum and Tyler Steen, who hasn't won a starting job. Didn't win it last year and didn't play as a rookie that much. So these are 3 guys that are relative unknowns in terms of sample size, and how they feel about them, I feel like how this draft is going to go and how it's going to be dictated.
I would agree with that 100%. Let's fast forward, and I normally wouldn't go this deep in the draft, but I am fascinated by the aspect of what the Eagles have in the later rounds because of how they are just so bunched up. And I'm also fascinated by this possibility. If you're the Eagles and one of these quarterbacks slips to, I don't want to say 134, but you've got these picks bunched up at one, and I don't know if they'll, I think there's a good chance that they'll use one of them to maybe move up or move back or move around and they'll change it. But I just find the whole dynamic fascinating that from 161 to 168, they have 3 of those 5 picks, which pretty much, if you have guys you like in that range, you can have whoever you want and you can trade however you want. But let's look at some quarterbacks that might be available there. Would you take a quarterback in this draft with one of those picks?
If it was me, no, because I don't think this quarterback class is really good to begin with. I think there's some guys with interesting traits, and maybe there's a guy on day 3, whether that's Dylan Gabriel. If you take out the height, he's a pretty good football player. If that's Kyle McCord, he's a really good rhythm thrower. He's got some good size to him. There are some guys potentially on day 3 that are intriguing targets. If I were the GM, probably not, but we are talking about Howie Roseman, and even though I would say it's more likely that they probably address other needs on D3 and maybe they skip out on a QB and bring in a UDFA guy QB, I'm not counting it out, though, because Tanner McKee has 2 years left. We see that the Eagles like to trade quarterbacks for value. We saw that with Kenny Pickett this year. And if you don't really believe in Dorian Thompson-Robinson being the guy in a scenario where you do trade Tanner McKee and then he would step into that number 2 role, if you don't believe Dorian Thompson-Robinson could do that and don't have much reason to believe it, he's thrown 1 touchdown and 10 interceptions in his career. And I know the situation hasn't been great, but I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson might be more your Ian Book type, candidate than he is your future backup quarterback if you trade Tanner McKee. So it's definitely a possibility. And Howie Roseman likes doing it. And honestly, it's smart. It's smart. Good teams do it. They invest in that position. They have guys that they feel confident in who could step in if their starting quarterback gets hurt. And they also are able to move them for future draft picks. So it's smart business. So I think Howie Roseman could definitely do it. I wouldn't do that because I don't love the quarterback class overall. But if Howie Roseman took a quarterback in the 5th round and let's say it's, maybe it is Dylan Gabriel, I wouldn't be totally shocked.
I want to see him pick Kyle McCord. He's a local kid. I think he had a fascinating season last year. I think his whole story is fascinating. He leaves Ohio State and another local kid replaces him, Will Howard. But he goes to Syracuse and throws 34 touchdowns in his last year at Syracuse. He just seemed like a guy who could be coached into being a pretty good quarterback. And I think it would make an interesting room. And I don't have a lot of trust in Dorian Thompson Robinson. I really don't. But
yeah.
So should we wrap it up?
Yes, we should wrap it up. But yeah, I agree with you. We might have a new quarterback in the room. But before we end today's podcast, Bob, I know there's 2 days before the draft. We've talked a lot today.
You're going to make me do a prediction?
Let's make your prediction. This is your final if you had to bet all your money in the whole entire world.
I got one more. I got one more mock draft to do.
All right.
But all right, you're gonna
Or
make me pick somebody, right?
yeah. Make you pick someone. It doesn't have to be your mock draft. This would be if Bob Brookover was the GM, I guess what do you think is most likely? The player?
All right. If I was the GM, um, I'm gonna. Wow, it's just a tough call. I'm going to go with Derek Harmon on the defensive interior. That he falls to them, and they take them, and I reserve the right to change my mind when I do my final mock draft for Thursday. But as we sit here, uh, I'm going to go with Derek Harmon.
Yeah. That's a good pick.
Who you got?
I'm going to go with another DT. I know Daniel Jeremiah, like I mentioned earlier, said he doesn't see Walter Nolan falling, but I believe in the class that is really deep with defensive linemen. If there are legitimate concerns about maturity with Walter Nolan, which is what Jeremy Fowler reported along those lines about him getting frustrated at practice, maybe he's a guy that slides in this position. Maybe they don't stay at 32, but maybe they trade up to 20, 29 to land that guy. And I think Walter Nolan is their dream scenario. He would plug and play right next to Jalen Carter. I know some people have said they see a little Jalen Carter and Walter Nolan, and I'm sure they would love that. So I'm going to go Walter Nolan. It could be any of these defensive linemen, though. I think this is where they're going to go. I think they're added depth in free agency here, but that's not going to stop the Eagles from keep replenishing the lines. And it's going to be a fun thing to see. But we want to thank everyone for listening today and tuning in. I'm sure you guys are excited for the draft. We'll have another podcast for you after the draft, recapping every single pick, every single scenario. We'll see how truly wrong we are after the draft. But thank you guys for tuning in. It is great as always, and we'll catch you next week.